Oh boy, it's been about 3 or 4 videos since I first said I'd been waiting for Augusta, and the time has finally arrived. I can definitely say the story was pretty good, and as someone with a little bit of a specialty in classical culture and history, this was a huge treasure trove in terms of symbolism and references. I'm not going to really beat around the bush because there is so much we need to cover through today. So both for the people who are watching for the first time and the people who've already watched some of my other videos, I'd just like to take a quick moment to thank you for your time, and without further ado, I'll be putting a quick glossary on the next page, and besides that, I will have to warn, if you haven't played the story, that there will be spoilers ahead. Before we get deep into things, I think it's rather important to quickly touch on what Augusta and Septimont actually mean, and where they come from. It's rather commonly known already that Septimont, which is Latin for 7 hills, is a reference to the city of Rome itself, which is often seen as a city of 7 hills. In essence, it's the primary seat of power and the cultural epicenter of Golden Age of classical Rome, which is something which will become rather important later. Augusta, which is the feminine form of the male Augustus, is Latin for majestic or great, and is important because it was a very popular title among Roman emperors, basically starting from the reign of Octavian. It's a title that connotes imperial authority, of strength and courage, which are all values that will be quite important going forward.
There was once a rough lump of iron, dull, forsaken, buried in scorched soil, until freed from dirt and grime.
Within one of the most famous and oldest political works ever, The Republic, Plato, as with many of the Athenian philosophers after the golden ages of 5th century BC, were discussing rather undemocratic concepts after they saw what happened when the masses were given opinions and powers, especially within the Peloponnesian War between Sparta and Athens. Within it, Plato proposes something that today we call the myth of metals, a sort of theory that allowed him to basically prove that only people of noble and upper class birth should be allowed in politics, while the lower classes shouldn't really be able to have a say. In it, Plato basically theorizes that every person has a type of metal inside of them. Those of high birth and education, i.e. the upper class, are made up of gold, which are precious metals that justify that they will be rulers and kings. Their helpers and people who can participate in politics, but aren't as high up as them, are made of silver, while the lower classes, such as artisans and farmers, are seen to have iron and brass within them. In essence, what Plato proposes is one of history's first written examples of a caste system. Everyone is born with a sort of innate metal within them, and that defines their fate in life, with no real ability to change your metal. For Plato, this was a means to social harmony, but for many modern audiences, his book has been seen as what we call a noble lie, a sort of ideological framework designed to essentially keep the powerful in power. When we relate this to Augusta, we actually see a lot of parallels. Augusta's character, who is pretty often defined in relation to Angel as weak, is heavily associated with rusted iron. Augusta knows and understands that she was born weak, just like how Plato associated her symbolic metal as being one of the lower classes, of weakness and inferiority. The whispers that talk to her through the campaign, being the lull of the dark tide, constantly remind her of her own inferiority and weakness. Even in the prophecy of the hero of heroes, Augusta is missing the extraordinary power that the past leaders of Septimont had. Her character foil, Avidius, is the opposite. He is, in Roman words, born to the purple, and supported by the Senate. He was blessed at birth with good resonance abilities, and is framed as a great replacement of Augusta, being someone who was naturally gifted. Yet by the end of the story we know that Augusta breaks from these shackles. Even rusted iron can be formed into an emperor's sword. In the end, it is revealed that the extraordinary power that Augusta wields is not something that she held at birth like a resonance ability, but overflowing dignity and care for the people. As Augusta says herself, a power granted rather than earned could never truly be mine. In the final strike against the false sovereign, it is seen that it is not the gold of nobility that strikes down evil, but the voices of millions of souls, of the 100 rusted iron blades of Augusta's sword that delivers the finishing blow. As such, through dedication and unwavering resilience, she ascends the seat of E4 and earns a true right to the throne as a hero of heroes, not through natural, granted gifts of fate, but with her own efforts. This is the true meaning of the heart of gold. It is not Plato's noble lie. It is not something you are born with or are granted, but something that you earn, spitting back blood and sand. To fight back against your birth and destiny is to fight back against fate itself.
There was once a rough lump of iron, abandoned in mud and mire. Yet, when the burning valor of its past kindled its silent furnace, the sharp blade within was ready. And so, once a scrap ignored by all, now it strikes at the throne. The once rough iron is now the true ruler's sword.
By far, probably the most important piece of visual symbolism in Augusta's story and character is the image of the sun that is everywhere on her design. Specifically speaking, the symbol, which she wears on her head and is everywhere in the story, is the icon of the Roman pagan god Sol Invictus, which is an incredible reference in my opinion because it's something that is parallel to basically everything that Augusta represents and stands for. Sol Invictus, which translates to the invincible or unconquerable sun, was a sort of amalgamation of many sun gods in the Roman Empire, such as the old sun god Sol and the Egyptian sun goddess Isis. It was symbolic of many of the key values that resonated within the Empire of Rome, and in extension, Septimont, such as strength, endurance, and a state of being eternal and unconquerable, like the very sun itself. When we think of Rome as the eternal city, that's the sort of symbolism that Sol Invictus essentially invokes. Matching that to Augusta, however, we can see that the symbolism of the sun and Sol Invictus is iconic in her beliefs and design. She will rule with strength, so that Septimont can endure the beat of the dark tide. However, understanding Sol Invictus by itself is only half of the puzzle. For any classical historian, it's effectively impossible to talk about Sol Invictus without also mentioning one of the greatest emperors in Roman history, Aurelian. Aurelian, who like Augusta came from very humble beginnings, began as a mere soldier at the very bottom of society before slowly making his way up to become an emperor through military might. He ascended to the throne in one of the more tumultuous times of Roman emperor, known as the crisis of the 3rd century, when it was being assaulted from nearly every side. Quite funnily enough, I think the death of desperation during the early periods of Aurelian's reign is pretty well shown through a trailer for Total War Rome 2, which I will quickly show on the screen here.
Hear me, for we are in crisis. To the north, Roman impostors, led by Tetricus, grow ever stronger. To the east, the usurper Queen Zenobia marches her armies into our lands. This is unacceptable. Give us an emperor from humble beginnings. Give us a leader our armies will follow. Give us Emperor Aurelian.
The devastation which the Roman Empire was facing is a direct parallel to the existential crisis of the Dark Tide assaulting Septimont. Just like Aurelian, who crushes threats one by one to usher in a period of peace for his empire, Augusta wields the same thing, guaranteeing the prosperity of the people in a period of despair. Aurelian even hated the Senate, like Augusta and many other Roman emperors, as they were self-interested and tried to often thwart the plans of the emperor.
I don't understand. Given Augusta's prestige, the Senate has no real advantage in seizing power. What's their angle?
It all started when Augusta shook things up the moment she became Ephor, especially in rooting out corruption within the gladiators' Aegon while ignoring the senators in the process. Naturally, it ruffled some feathers. Some even accused her of undermining the spirit of gladiating. In reality, they'd just upset their piggy banks got smashed.
I will empower you to one end alone, to give power back to the people of Rome and end the corruption that has crippled it. Will you accept this great honor that I have offered you?
With all my heart, no.
Maximus, that is why it must be you.
But surely a prefect, a senator, somebody who knows the city, who understands her politics.
But you have not been corrupted by her politics.
However, what really puts a nail in for the connection of both of these characters is Aurelian's efforts in using the Roman sun god, Sol Invictus, and promoting it as basically the state religion. Aurelian was a huge supporter of Sol Invictus. In a time when Rome was beaten, divided, and fractured, Sol Invictus was not only a symbol of strength and endurance, but also of unity, as a religion was basically led by a head figure which represented the imperial power of the state. And if you think about it, with the symbolism of the sun that we've gone through, and how it represents unity, power, strength, and the eternal survival of the empire, Augusta's constant references to the sun and her visuals of sunlight and sunshine makes a lot of sense. In fact, Augusta says herself that the people do not need to be loyal to her, that the citizens of Septimont need only be loyal to Septimont, prioritizing the well-being of the state over her as an individual. When she deals the final blow to the false sovereign to save Septimont, she's assisted by not a resonance ability, but the spirit of all the souls of the empire, of all the people of Septimont that reside under the sun. In this vein, Augusta deserves the same title that was conferred onto Aurelian after his campaigns, Restitutor Orbis, the Restorer of the World. One of the aspects that confused me about Augusta before the release of 2.6 was how thunder would be relating into her design and symbolism, as she was an electro character. After thinking about it for a long time, I think I've probably figured it out, because when we sort of think about it, Augusta isn't really actually a fire-related resonator, but more of one of sun, sand, and iron. Aside from the fact that the concept of her as an electroresonator is tied to her resonance abilities of magnetism, one thing I think not a lot of people know is that she is also tied very heavily to the gods of the Forge, who in mythological canon have made some of the most famous armor and weapons of classical history. For example, Hephasteus and his Roman version Vulcan created both the armor and swords of gods and heroes such as Jupiter, Achilles, and Aeneas, the founder of Rome, even Julius Caesar's sword in some instances. Within the Forge, it was not only fire that was used to shape metal, but also Jupiter's thunderbolts, with the flashes and pounds of the hammer often being said to sound like thunder. For instance, an extract from the Aeneid by the Roman poet Virgil confirms this well. At once he roused his fires in every hollow, deep in the caverns of his vast volcanic forge. The Cyclopses set to work, Brontes, Steropes, and the bare-limbed Pyracemon, forging at the anvils, shaping a thunderbolt, the kind that Jupiter hurls down from heaven in showers upon the earth, part finished, part still glowing from the flame. As Nestor narrates the story of how Augusta stands before the forge, gazing at the flying sparks from the blacksmith's forge, we see where fire and thunder intertwine into her story. It is not only her resonance ability, but also of the sword herself that has witnessed the rise and fall of the blacksmith's hammer that thunders to form her legendary weapon. Like many of the famous armor and weapons in classical history, such as Achilles' armor, Aeneas' sword and armor, and even supposedly Julius Caesar's sword, the Crocea Mors, Augusta's weapon is forged through fire and thunder. And when you think about what all of these imperial swords of these famous classical figures represent, the beginning of empires, the beating back of tragedy, and then you think about Augusta's sword, which carries the will of her people, of not gold, but the 100 blades of rusted iron, then it answers the question pretty well. Why is Augusta an electro rather than a fire resonator? Because she, as a person, as a leader, is not itself made of fire, but of electricity and thunder. She is the magnetic force that brings her people and nation together.
A sharp blade slumbered within, awaiting the trial of fire. Hammered and pounded. Purged of impurity, thus its steely frame was forged. Now awakened, a blade cutting through all, yet it was honed to achieve more. Yet, with unshakable resolve, the blade feared no storm or flame. Maelstroms engulfed its frame. Fire scorched its crossguard.
When you first read the first of the two prophecies in the Tetragon Temple, the first one is something that immediately stands out. It's something that has actually been foreshadowed already in some of the tweets about 2.6, so I was actually already expecting something like this before the update even came out. The references to doom, revelation, and a destined destruction ravaging the land of non-believers, I think is a very clear reference to the Book of Revelations, which, while we will talk about much later, for now, I would say, talks about a central sort of conflict, the fight between Christianity and Roman paganism. For those that are not aware, for much of the history of Rome, especially that of the Western Empire, that we derive a lot of what we imagine Rome today to be of. The state and government were not Christian, but rather pagan, meaning that they believed in a multitude of gods, with a state pantheon that was an evolution of the Greek one. For example, we can see through archaeological evidence in Pompeii that there existed a variety of religions in Rome, and as long as one, such as Christianity, did not really threaten the dominant state religion, the Romans were pretty okay with you practicing another one, right? So, the problem was, when Christianity began, it was something that really undermined paganism, because the whole concept of the Roman religious sphere, where it was allowed to believe in a variety of other gods, was threatened by Christianity's monotheism, where it only believed in one god and refused the existence of others. When you have an empire like Rome that was made up of a huge range of people from many different places, the system of pagan religious freedom was actually a critical point of social stability, which Christianity's monotheism really threatened. Christians oftentimes refused orders, used aggressive conversion tactics, and it was also something that was very common amongst the lower classes of Roman society. This means that it was of particular threat to the social fabric of Rome, and that's why it was discriminated and cracked down upon quite extensively compared to other religions. In fact, it was not until the rule of Constantine in 300 AD, 300 years after the death of Christ, that Christianity began to accept and be the state religion in the empire. When you consider the duality of Septimont, which represents classical Rome, with its reference to the Seven Hills of Rome, and Restitutor, which represents a Christian Renaissance Italy, and Rome itself, with its name meaning rebirth in Italian, we see a historical parallel of Rome itself. Rome, during the golden ages of the empire, was the ultimate seat of pagan authority of the Roman state, and after the fall of the West, it became the ultimate seat of the Catholic papacy. In essence, Rome as a place and as a city is a physical manifestation of the clash between paganism and Christianity. Edward Gibbon, who wrote one of the most famous history books ever, called The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, attributed to Christianity a significant portion of blame for the fall of the West. As we already mentioned before, the entire foundation of Christianity in itself was very damaging to social stability of an already unstable state of Rome. When we look at the first prophecy in the Tetragon Temple, we see a lot of parallels of this. The divinity is the religion of Ragunna, which is symbolic of Christianity, and the Book of Revelations and how it forces other religions to conform to its monotheism is put in the context of the Western Empire and Edward Gibbon's work in analyzing the fall of the West. In essence, Christianity and the religion of Ragunna, or, as we know now, the religion of Leviathan, is not a force of salvation, but rather, in the eyes of those Septimonian pagans, a destructive force that will sweep away all that will not follow its will. As we talked about the fight between paganism and Christianity a little already, now is a good time to go into the other side and see the Book of Revelations, which, from the side of Christianity, tells us the message of rejecting Roman paganism, essentially. One of the most famous parts, which I think is particularly relevant here, is of Revelation 17:9 to 17:14, which are as follows. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits, they are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. But when he does come, he must remain for only a little while. The beast who once was and now is not is an 8th king. He belongs to 7 and is going to his destruction. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received the kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings along with the beast. They have one purpose and will give their power and authority to the beast. They will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. As we've established already, the 7 hills, which in Latin is Septimont, represents Roman paganism. Kuro has done an interesting and frankly rather ambitious thing here by essentially depicting Christianity, which we've already seen from how it's been previously associated with the Order of the Deep and the Leviathan, as basically a sort of evil and corrupt force that the Frenodian weaponizes to control the state. In the Book of Revelations, we see that it is stated that all places and kingdoms that reject the divine will of monotheistic Christianity will suffer the consequences of destruction. In Ezekiel 30-3, we see the Lord telling the priest Ezekiel the following: "For the day is near, the day of the Lord is near, a day of clouds, a time of doom for the nations." This is very clearly a reference to the first prophecy in the Tetragon Temple, and the manifestation of the dark tide in Septimont supports this. The dark tide is made up of dark clouds in the sky, of the impending doom of the new faith of Leviathan overtaking the paganism and traditions of Septimont. Even, for instance, the final boss, being the false sovereign, as the face of Leviathan's dark tide, I personally believe may be a bit of a reference to a sort of caricature of God and Jesus itself. It is a false divinity that seeks to usurp Septimont from its traditional roots. And like how the Romans historically resisted the spread of Christianity, Kuro, who as we stated in the previous section, have symbolically equated the religion as the ruin of empires, basically positions the gladiators of Septimont to stand in opposition of this false divinity. As the Roman philosopher Celsus says in his work, De Contra Celsum, Jesus deluded goatherds and shepherds into the belief that there was one God, whom they called the highest, or the Adonai, or the heavenly, or the Sabaoth, or whatever names they pleased to give to this world, and there their knowledge ceased. It is of no import whether the God over all be called by the name that is usual among the Greeks, or that which obtains among the Indians or Egyptians.
Stratia hepta ethnikon mekatishkoi, anaskisusi.
During Greek and Roman times, religions and prophecies were important in a way that is pretty hard to understand today. People believed in prophecies all the time. When it came to business, politics, and even war, Greeks and Romans would often look towards prophecies to guide them for nearly everything. As such, we see the importance of the 2 prophecies for Augusta's story, and now we will focus on the second. During classical times, the most prestigious prophets of the future and prophecy givers were the priestesses in the Temple of Delphi, who would be visited by kings and generals from all over the Greco-Roman world to seek their insight. As a bit of a spoiler, this will not be the last time we talk about Delphic oracles, but for now we must focus on Augusta. Though they have given many important prophecies in history, the one we'll be focusing on today is the infamous one given to King Leonidas before the Battle of Thermopylae, which has been made famous by Hollywood as the Battle of the 300. In it, the Delphic oracle tells the Spartan king that if he is to fight the Persians, either he will die in battle or the Persians will ransack the city of Sparta. O ye men who dwell in the streets of broad Lacedaemon, Either your glorious town shall be sacked by the children of Perseus, or, in exchange, must all through the whole Laconian country mourn for the loss of a king, descendant of great Heracles. He cannot be withstood by the courage of bulls nor lions. Strive as they may, he is mighty as Jove. There is naught that shall stay him, till he have got for his prey your king, or your glorious city. As you may be able to tell already, Leonidas' prophecy is quite obviously a direct inspiration for the Tetragon Temple's second prophecy, of which is rather much very important for Augusta's story. The Persian invasion of Leonidas' time, if you've ever read Herodotus' histories, has the exact same feeling, atmosphere, and characterization as a dark tide taking over Septimont. Both of them were seen as this wave of evil that will consume the entire country. Augusta's plan to be slayed at the hands of Rover to secure the need for the blood of the old king actually fulfills the second prophecy, and it is in itself a direct parallel to Leonidas' one, because both prophecies require the death of the old king to herald victory and salvation. The whole fight with the false sovereign is also iconic of the Battle of Thermopylae, or the Battle of the 300. If you know the history, both Thermopylae and the battle against the false sovereign are fights which will determine the future of nations. They are final. They have desperate odds. Both battles require immense sacrifice. When Augusta commits to sacrificing herself to stop the dark tide, displaying not only courage but dignity, it mirrors the actions of Leonidas in showing the courage in sacrificing oneself for the fate of an entire nation.
I give my blood, so that the true hero may rise!
Within the boss fight with the final sovereign, one of the most fascinating scenes is when Augusta is swallowed up by the dark tide and confronts her fears and inner self, especially as it is something that we know from lore to be something that exposes your personal weaknesses and fear. And when we finally stepped into Augusta's vision, as soon as I saw the water flowing, I had a bit of an instant lightbulb moment, because this was so clearly a reference to Greek Underworld and the rivers of the afterlife in Greek mythology, which was a place that souls reach after death. The dead would then be guided to cross the 5 rivers, being the Acheron, Cocytus, Phlegethon, Styx, and the Lethe. These rivers were all different, but many of these, namely the Acheron, Cocytus, and Phlegethon, were seen as rivers of punishment, where a soul would be surrounded by the wails of the dead or be forced to confront their worst pains and fears, giving something up in crossing every river so they could be resurrected as a pure soul. This is a direct parallel to what Augusta does as she metaphorically dies, crossing the rivers of the underworld and giving up something every step of the way, whether it be her sword, her crown, or her flesh, until she is reduced to nothing. Throughout the campaign, we've seen the whispers taunt Augusta with granted power, of what I like to call the promise of Elysium. The Elysium was an afterlife or a heaven of sorts in classical mythology, and is something that you can hear whispered by the damned souls in Mermastown as Abby repeats the song they sing.
Did you hear that? Through me walk the path of glorious ascension. Through me enter the city of eternal bliss. Yet all who enter must first forsake all hope.
Through me walk the path of glorious ascension. Through me enter the city of eternal bliss. Yet all who enter must first forsake all hope. Many Romans who discuss Christianity equate the concept of heaven to be akin with the Greek Elysium, but as we discussed before, Kuro has characterized the dark tide as a sort of twisted and evil mockery of Christianity. This is because the lines that Abby repeats, the song that the dead speak in Murmurstown, sound akin to a place of hope, of Elysium, but it is anything but that. Abby's lines in Songs of the Dead are a parody of the inscription on the gates of hell from Dante's Inferno, which as we know Kuro loves using as a symbolism point. They read as follows: "Through me is a way to city of woe, through me is a way to eternal pain. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." We can see that the differences are plain. This is a false promise of Elysium that the dark tide offers. Masking itself as a city of eternal bliss, it masquerades as heaven, as Elysium, but it is none other than hell. In Canto 3 of Dante's Inferno, Dante and Virgil, having died, are given two choices, of either passing through the gates of hell, of which what we just read is inscribed on the gates, or to confront one's fears, passing over and crossing the river Acheron. This symbolic choice is iconic in Augusta's story, as she metaphorically gets swallowed up and is offered the same choice as Dante in his book Inferno. In the end, she refuses the divine but false Elysium offered by the dark tide, choosing the hard path of the river Acheron to be reborn and break free of its clutches. As always, thank you everybody for watching. Augusta's story is one that I would personally consider as something you can understand and enjoy more if you understand all the symbolism and references, so I do hope that I have done that for you in this video. If you enjoyed, it would be much appreciated if you could like, share, even subscribe, and as usual, if you have anything you'd like to critique or add, I'm very open to having a discussion in the comments. But besides that, I hope everyone has a great rest of their day, and I will see you next time.
It wasn't a pleasant experience. But in a strange way, it was refreshing. If you want to hear the full story, I'll tell you another time. But back inside the dark tide, I think the lost frequencies were always guiding me, shaping who I was becoming. Even trapped in that abyss of despair, those fallen heroes never gave up. They lit a faint, warm light in the dark for me. And you, along with everyone who stood by me. Without you, we couldn't have won this battle. Perhaps the title of ruler is too narrow and too hollow to define the true spirit of humankind. A civilization's glory is forged by generations of brave souls. It was never meant to be one person's medal of honor.